These are 5 UFC fighters who made history, but for all the wrong reasons. The first one takes place at UFC 259, Petr Yan versus Aljamain Sterling, which was one of the most heated grudge matches in bantamweight history. Yan had just dominated Jose Aldo to win the title and was looking like a future long-term champion. His performances were clean, composed, and brutal when they needed to be. Sterling, on the other hand, was a high-volume grappler with an aggressive style, and in the lead up to this fight, the two made it clear they genuinely did not like each other whatsoever. In the fight, Sterling came out fast, but by the 4th round, he was exhausted. Yan clearly was taking over and was looking like he was on the way to another dominant win. Then it happened. Sterling was down on one knee, Yan looked over to his corner, misheard their instructions, and fired a knee straight to Sterling's head while he was grounded. Sterling collapsed and the fight was waved off after some questionable acting. It was the first time in UFC history that a title changed hands due to a disqualification. Sterling didn't celebrate and he even dropped the belt in the cage when it was handed to him. But fans accused him of faking it and even fighters mocked him online. And he would even go on to win the rematch clean, but the first belt will always be remembered for the way it was handed to him, not the way he earned it. So that was the time a title changed hands by disqualification. But this next moment didn't just shake up a division, it nearly shut down an entire UFC event. Because by 2018, Conor McGregor was no longer just a fighter, he was a global brand. He had become the first UFC fighter to hold 2 titles at the same time. He had just boxed Floyd Mayweather for hundreds of millions of dollars, and he had not fought in the UFC in over a year. Meanwhile, the lightweight division had moved on. A new contender had emerged, Khabib Nurmagomedov. Khabib was undefeated, dominant, and quiet outside of the cage, but ruthless inside of it. And he was quickly becoming the new face of the division Conor once ruled. Then came UFC 223 Fight Week in Brooklyn. A few days before the event, Khabib and his team confronted Artem Lobov, one of Conor's close friends and training partners, and the video went viral instantly. Within 48 hours, Conor was on a private jet to New York. He showed up at the Barclays Center during media day, surrounded by a crew of his own people. They rushed into the loading dock, found the fighter's bus, and chaos broke out. Conor picked up a metal dolly and threw it straight through the window of the bus. Fighters inside were cut by broken glass. Michael Chiesa and Ray Borg were both even pulled from the car due to injuries from the broken glass. Dana White called it the most disgusting thing to ever happen in UFC history. Conor McGregor was arrested, charged, and sued. But somehow, months later, that very footage became the centerpiece of the promo for UFC 229, which was the biggest UFC pay-per-view event in UFC history. And the press conference, the interviews, the walkouts, all were built around that one moment. It was the most chaotic buildup the UFC had ever seen. And it all started with one flying dolly in a Brooklyn parking lot. Conor McGregor made history that weekend. Just not the kind the UFC usually promotes. But if you think that moment was reckless, wait until you hear about the fighter who injured himself after already winning. So Johnny Walker entered the UFC like a bolt of lightning. His size, his athleticism, his energy, everything about him screamed future contender. He made his debut on short notice and knocked out now light heavyweight contender Khalil Roundtree in the very first round. Then he knocked out Justin Ledet in just 15 seconds. People were already calling for a fight with Jon Jones. That is how fast the hype around Johnny Walker exploded. Then came UFC 235. He faced Misha Cirkunov, a tough, well-rounded fighter, and Walker landed a flying knee and followed up with punches, which ended the fight in just 36 seconds, which was another highlight reel for Johnny Walker. Then came his celebration. Johnny dropped to the canvas and started doing the worm, and the crowd loved it. The commentators laughed, and then he just automatically stopped moving. Somewhere in the middle of his celebration, he dislocated his shoulder. He rolled over in pain while his coaches rushed in to help. The celebration sidelined him for months, and his momentum was gone. The UFC light heavyweight division moved on without him. What should have been a breakout moment turned into a cautionary tale, because Johnny Walker made history, not for what he did to his opponent, but for what he accidentally did to himself. And while Johnny Walker's injury was self-inflicted, this next fighter did everything right inside the cage and still lost everything outside of it. Now, most champions lose their belts in a fight, But Charles Oliveira lost his without even throwing a single punch. So the year is 2022, and Charles Oliveira has completely rewritten his story. He started his UFC career as an inconsistent featherweight, but eventually rose to the top of the lightweight division. He was not just winning, he was finishing elite fighters. I'm talking Michael Chandler, Dustin Poirier, and even Justin Gaethje had all been stopped. He had more finishes than anyone in UFC history, and people were calling him the most dangerous man at 155 pounds. Then came UFC 274. Charles Oliveira on the scale at 155.5 pounds, which is half a pound over the championship limit. He was given an hour to cut the remaining weight, and he tried everything: the sweatsuits, the treadmill, and even the sauna. But when he stepped up back to the scale, the number was exactly the same. In an instant, the commission stripped him of his title. It was the first time in UFC history that a reigning champion lost his belt without ever stepping inside the octagon. What makes it even worse is what happened next. Charles Oliveira went out the next night and submitted Justin Gaethje in the very first round. He had done everything a champion is supposed to do, but officially, the belt stayed vacant, and Charles Oliveira had made weight nearly 40 times before that. But on the one night it truly mattered, he came up just short. I'm talking half a pound. So the most dominant lightweight in the world walked away with no gold, and that will always be part of his story. But Charles Oliveira was not the only fighter to walk into the UFC spotlight and walk away with nothing. This next one might be the most doomed debut in UFC history, because in 2014, CM Punk shocked the sports world by signing with the UFC. He was one of the biggest names in professional wrestling, but he had never fought before. Not in boxing, not in MMA, not even in an amateur fight. He joined Rufu Sport and trained with serious fighters like Anthony Pettis and Tyron Woodley, who were both former champions. He put in the work and he took it very seriously. But once the octagon door closed for his UFC debut, the difference in levels was impossible to ignore. CM Punk made his debut against Mickey Gall in 2016. He charged forward, got taken down instantly, and he never recovered. Mickey Gall submitted him in just over 2 minutes. Still, CM Punk did not give up. He trained for 2 more years and came back to fight Mike Jackson. This time, he survived all 3 rounds, but it was not competitive. Dana White called it painful to watch, and the fans definitely agreed with him. CM Punk finished his UFC run with 0 wins and 2 losses. His fights brought in attention and headlines, but in a division full of killers, attention is not enough. CM Punk never stopped trying, but this was a sport where trying is not what gets your hand raised. His UFC career was historic, just not in the way he imagined. Now, if you thought these were wild, wait until you see what happened when random people tried fighting UFC fighters. Trust me, it's worse than you think. Click here to watch it now.